Welcome to Author Mama Reads, where I give you my first impressions of all the books I review. Today's book, Firstborn by Robin Lee Hatcher, and, surprise, also by Robin Lee Hatcher, Belonging. I just started reading the first page, sort of trying to work myself up to it, like prime the pump, like, you can do it, you can read contemporary. So I read the first page and got immediately hooked. Oh, my cat is trying to crawl on the table. Dasher, 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 get the cat, go get it. Barb Dobson, Sarah Connors. Who are these women? This is the question that I will ask myself until the end of this book. I'm not crying, but I am getting emotional. She's doing a good job. Makes me sad. I'm not quite halfway through, and I feel like at this point, if nothing else happens, the entirety of the plot has been revealed. I don't feel like you need another more than half of a book to sum up these problems. So I'm hoping that something else gets thrown in the mix that sort of brings everyone back together but becomes another problem in its own right that they have to overcome. So we will see. Positive comment, she has this sentence: the phone rang, the receptionist answered it, dogs barked somewhere in the bowels of the building. I actually really like that. Okay, I'm crying again. Page 194 is the best page of the whole book so far. Steven needed to hear that. He has been a jerk. This is hard. Oh my gosh. It's not getting easier. So, contemporary books are not something I normally read. I really enjoy historical fiction. But I was introduced to contemporary by my friend Bethany Reel, who goes by BD Reel for her books. She wrote, I'm getting down for you. She wrote The Earth is Full, The Heavens Are Telling. These are pretty thick books too, and Trending. And she also has another one. The name is escaping me, even though I helped edit that one. But I love them. Like, honest to goodness, love them. I just think I love her writing. So that got me started. So when I saw Firstborn, I sort of cringed at first because I thought, oh, that doesn't look like anything that interests me, but I'm going to try it anyway. And just in case it doesn't interest me within the first couple chapters, I will get her historical fiction book, Belonging. I'm really glad that I got both. On Facebook, she said her newest book coming out is called How Sweet It Is. I think it comes out summer of this year, but you might want to check on that. She has 96 books on Goodreads. 96. That's a lot of books. Kind of ruining my theory about the more books you write in a year, the less good they are. She actually seems to write quite a few books. At first I thought the first book, the first series she had that I saw started in 1990. And at first it seemed like she only wrote one book a year. I looked at all her standalone books, and are so many. Obviously she wrote 96 books, and it actually looks like the standalones were interspersed within her series in terms of when she wrote, and she was probably writing 2 to 3 books a year, like easily, at least publishing them. So that's crazy. That's amazing. Especially since I really enjoyed her books. I felt like she did a really good job. I do have some criticisms, but all in all, when I opened Firstborn, I opened it on the Saturday I came back from the library just to get myself started in it. I read like a couple pages, and then I couldn't put it down. And I finished it Sunday. So I started it Saturday, finished it Sunday. I started Belonging on Sunday and finished it today, which is Tuesday. I did not give you my first impressions of Belonging as I went through it. It would have gotten too long. Something that I would say in comparison is that when I first started reading the contemporary book, I felt like it was very simple. Like the writing was very simple. Not bad, like good writing, but sort of unembellished. What I thought was interesting, and this is the first time I've noticed it, is that then I read the historical book and I felt like she was more embellishing of her sentences, and it did seem a little more interesting to me. And I wondered why that was, and then I realized I think that's the difference between contemporary and historical, is that historical sounds more interesting to some people because it'll say, you know, they hitched up the wagon, he, you know, took off the brake, like the buckboard brake or whatever, and then he flicked the reins. It's describing these things that are a little bit foreign to us because we don't do it all the time. Whereas in the contemporary book, it was saying things like he switched the car into gear, you know, he put on it, this wasn't exactly in there, but let's just say he put on his blinker, or she slid in the car and he shut the door, and I'm missing all of the detail because I'm like, well, that's life, right? That's normal. It's uninteresting to me, which is why I am drawn to historical. So I don't, looking back now, think that this is simpler writing. I think it's just more, well, contemporary. Something that my brain recognizes, therefore sort of blocks out or gets bored with. It wasn't good or bad, and I just realized why some people might really like contemporary and why people might be very bored and feel like historical is more wordy, when probably it's not. It's just saying things that are we're unaccustomed to. And so maybe it needs to give a little bit more description. Okay, seeing that, getting into the book. I have my notes. Firstborn kept going back and forth. I did really like that it did that, went from present day to the past when she was 16 years old. I felt like it was a nice way to avoid info dumps in the present because there was a lot of backstory that she needed to get across, and I thought this was a really interesting way to get it across, so I enjoyed that. Boop. I also could tell right away when Erica talked about how she was pregnant at one point that it was going to be Dallas's baby. Sorry, spoiler. You're gonna figure that out. It's not hard. And that's not really what the book is about. So there's a couple things that were predictable, but I still enjoy the story. Now we have some more. Look at all these. In the very beginning, she portrayed Dallas as kind of a playboy, like a player, and he dated lots of girls and he wasn't very serious with any of them, and he wasn't a Christian. Stephen was not necessarily portrayed that way, but to me, in my head, he was guilty by association. So he went away to college. I mean, he didn't make Erica any promises when he went away to college. She was 16, he was like almost 20, or I guess 18 or 19. And he didn't make her any promises, but then the very next chapter when they're married in the future, I had a hard time connecting with Stephen for a long time because I felt like he was a jerk. Like in the back of my head, I didn't trust him. I didn't believe he really loved her, and I had to really fight that. And then I realized he was just guilty by association, that wasn't who the author was trying to make him to be. So I wish she could have given me a little bit more reason to like Stephen in the beginning, because I really do later, but it took me a long time to trust him. And already by chapter 8, I didn't trust him. Okay, so something that irritated me was silly little nicknames, like Kirsten's friend called her Kir, K-I-R, or Kier, and then she called her friend, oh no, it was her boyfriend. She called him Van. I've never heard of Van for a boy. Is that like Vance? I don't know. The need to give nicknames if they're not super important, I just didn't like it. Just my opinion. That's just being picky. Now, I was disappointed to have Kirsten's POV. I don't know why, but when Kirsten came on The View, she was the daughter that was adopted out, grown up, she was brought on the scene in chapter 8. I was like, ew, no, I don't want to hear about her. I was so interested in Erica's story that I wasn't ready. I mean, you're hearing about Erica, and you're hearing about Steven, and you're hearing about Dallas and Paula, and I just was not ready to hear about Kirsten's story. It just, to me, happened too soon. That was the one place in the book that I did feel like was regurgitated. She was worried about moving to where her birth mom was, and then the next scene, she was worried about the same thing, only she was traveling, and then the next one, she was maybe worried about the same thing, only she got to a gas station, and the next time she was worried about the same thing, she got to a hotel. And so the only minor thing that changed is maybe her mom gave her a phone call, or her boyfriend gave her a phone call, and so you're hearing a little bit of why she's worried, but you get it, you know it. I would almost have rather pushed Kirsten's POV to like farther into the story, and then just sort of summarize the whole thing. Like, when she left, you know, she was worried and distraught, and she had gotten phone calls from her mother and from the boyfriend, but she'd broken up with him, or such and such. Like, I think she could have just sort of condensed it all instead of making it so regurgitated every time. Just that was just my opinion. I didn't enjoy Kirsten's role, and quite honestly, other than that she had to be in the book, the story really wasn't about her. It was, and I didn't get this till later, the story was really about Erica and her husband, Steven. Poor Seraphina, she's crying because she doesn't want to go to bed. I thought the book was going to be about Erica and Kirsten. And so it took me a while to realize what was actually happening and the depth of turmoil that happened in their marriage and where that took them. Barb Dobson. Barb Dobson was a friend. That was just one of those things where I didn't like that they brought in a person that was barely mentioned. Like, I don't like that they named him. But then after reading the historical book, I realized that there were some names given in that one too, and I seemed to be fine with it. So honestly, I really think it's just this different contemporary genre which throws me, and things seem more necessary to me in this because I'm like, I don't want to hear about it. Don't tell me about that. That's normal life. So I'm just realizing my sensitivity to the different genres. So I don't actually think that was as big a deal as I thought it was at first. Needing my glasses here. One thing I do like about the story and her writing was that it was short and sweet. At least each section with Kirsten, even if I felt it was unnecessary, at least it was short. It was like a couple paragraphs and then it moved on. So in other books where the information is regurgitated, I feel like I'm reading like page after page of it, and that's when I just start to skim and I put the book down. I didn't feel like I had to skim in this book. I felt like if I did skim, I probably would miss something. So I did like that she would at least get to the point. She did have some mistakes in the story though. Okay, so there was this car scene, and Erica, it says, okay, the driver opened the rear door of the Toyota. Erica scarcely gave her a glance before sliding into the back seat, cradling the beloved mutt against herself. And then it says, Erica looked at the young woman beside her. So that was weird because it just said she got in the back seat with the dog. And then it says that the woman's beside her, which didn't make any sense. And then, so this is more like a content error, not like a grammatical error, but like a content error. And then it also says that she said her name, and then all of a sudden they're in a vet office, and they literally carry on, like from that point in the car, the conversation. And it doesn't make any sense because the conversation in the car happened as soon as they got in the car and they started driving. The conversation finishes but picks up at that same point when they'd already gotten there and are sitting in a vet office. So as a reader, you realize that there was a passage of time, but as it didn't seem that the writer, it just seems like it was like 2 seconds later, and that didn't make any sense to me. So there was that. And then that happened in the other book as well. I'll just tell you now, there was a scene where she was confused about two people being engaged, and she talked about to her friend, the protagonist talked to her friend and said, well, because you guys are engaged. And she said, no, we're not engaged. She goes, are you sure? She goes, yes, I'm sure. We're not engaged. And then later she kept saying, she felt awful about having feelings for this guy because he was engaged. So later it suggested that she just didn't believe her, but that didn't make any sense because at the time that the friend protested and said, no, I'm not engaged, they should have then had, Robin should have then had the protagonist say, like, or have some head thoughts that said, well, she said she wasn't, but maybe that's just because she wanted to keep it a secret. And so at least you get the impression that she doesn't believe her, but there was no impression that the protagonist didn't believe her. Therefore, when she said later, like, because they're engaged and that's why she felt guilty, you're just thinking, what just happened? Like, you're not keeping track of what your characters are saying in your books. So I feel like that needs to be a little bit more paid attention to because it was confusing. But so much of this book was well executed. This one. Really, really. Like, the son, who's only like 16 or 17. I loved Ethan. Oh my gosh. You never got in his head. You never got his POV. You didn't need to. He was just perfect the way she wrote him in the book. I just thought he was in it the perfect amount of time, said the right things, seemed like a teenager, seemed very kind. And her choice never to bring in Ethan's girlfriend, thank you, because she would have had no purpose in this book whatsoever. She would not have moved the plot along one iota. He always referred to his girlfriend. He referred to going out on a date with her or out to the movie with her or I'm going to go meet her. Never did she even come over to the house. Never was she brought into the picture. And I felt like that was a fantastic choice because she meant nothing to the plot. It was just a way to get Ethan out of the house. And that worked for me. So I was very, very happy. Okay, so at first in this particular book, the husband and wife dialogue felt very real. Sometimes you don't say a lot to each other when you're married. Sometimes your sentences are short and sweet, especially if you're irritated or angry with each other. Now, it felt like it fit these particular characters. In Belonging had that same sort of short but sweet sentences to each other. And in that one, they were just getting to know each other, and it did not work as well. There was something lacking in the relationship between the protagonist, the female, and the male. And I wish that had been drawn out a little more. So in this one, it worked. In that one, I didn't feel like it played very well into their personalities. This book has been the most emotional, relatable. You saw how much I cried. I was like crying every 2 seconds. Oh, it was a roller coaster, man. Oh, another thing I want to praise her for. There was a conversion between some people, and it was so short and sweet. Honestly, it was like, and he thought this and this and this, and then he felt new. As a Christian, I'm into the story. I don't need to hear a drawn out conversion because I know what that's like, and I just want to hear good fiction. And so the conversion was actually very short and sweet, but I liked it. And I think everybody's conversion story is so different that how can you package that anyway? I had a conversion in my book, and man, it was hard, and I really did try to skip over some of it. Like, he gave her verses, but I didn't say what their whole conversation was during that time because I think you can imagine it, but then it sounds weird when you try to write it out. So I really like that. And then I think as a non-believer who might pick up this book and read it, that then it would be easy for them to be like, oh, well, what was that? Oh, that piques my interest, but maybe not feel blindsided by it, or that, oh my gosh, this is just such a preachy book. So I felt it was really the perfect amount of attention given to it. No miracles in character development, true and honest writing. The father of the girl, of Erica, man, that was left off. If there's not a sequel to this, I think this is a standalone. Not every relationship ends up pretty, and there was one part between two characters that just didn't end the way maybe you might have hoped it would, but I think it would have been cheesy if she had tried to end it and just sum it all up. I don't think you could have. I think that would have been a whole new development book, and why he felt the way he did and how he grew up and why he was the way he was. I don't think he could have changed in this quick of time. So she didn't try to make him change, and I thought that was really, really another good choice on her part. I like the ending. I love the ending. It again, not a pretty bow. It wasn't wrapped up in a pretty bow, but it was hope. It was hopeful, and I think you knew they'd be okay. It's like, okay, I can stop worrying now. It'll be okay. But it wasn't maybe what you'd expect in an ending, and I was totally fine with that. It was enough. I liked it. Loved it. Okay, that's all my notes. About halfway through this book, I was thinking, I like this book, but if something else doesn't happen, I'm gonna wonder what this book is really about. Well, what else happened was that the relationship between Eric and her husband got really bad, and so that was what needed to be mended. Halfway through this book, I was thinking, where's the conflict between the hero and heroine? And there was conflict outside of them. And it was okay. They didn't have to have conflict. Sometimes you get tired of there being conflict between them. Why can't they all just get along? But nothing was really keeping them apart. They, for the most part, got along. There was the hint that they wouldn't, but it resolved. Again, it was just kind of a hilly book in terms of conflict, not anything major to really invest yourself in. So I liked it, but I skimmed a fair amount. Because I did start to get kind of bored with it. Certain things that could have been conflicts between them had potential that weren't. So the main guy, it turns out, he couldn't read very well. And he never went to her for help. It just suggested later that she knew. But that could have been a time where they sat together. It could have been a time, like it was a missed opportunity for them to have time alone, for her to help him read, and then to have some good conversations through that time together. And the whole time, you knew he couldn't read is because his wife, who he was never really in love with, and she was never really in love with him, or so you assumed, she became a Christian later in their marriage. She had written him a letter before she died, and he had it in his Bible, but he didn't read it because he couldn't read, and he didn't ask anyone else to read it. And it brought up the letter several times, and even towards the end, he like had it and tucked it back in his Bible, and it never told you what it said. Like, she could have read it to him. That could have been something between them. He could have found like maybe she did end up loving him later in their marriage before she died. I don't know. I can't imagine it being brought up in the second or third book, and maybe it is. I guess it could be. So if she's planning on doing that, then I think that would have been good that she does close that up. But at this point in this book, it was just like, it seemed like she just forgot. And one thing that did bug me about her character was that because she did think that Colin was engaged, she never seemed to question his character. Like, she questioned herself, like, oh, I shouldn't be having feelings for him because he's engaged to my friend. But he almost kissed her, and he danced with her, and he kind of flirted with her a little bit. Why didn't she ever once say anything negative about his character? Like, if she thought that he was engaged, then why would she like him? Like, once I found that out, I'd be kind of angry, and I would have had some negative thoughts about that, some conflicting thoughts, and that did not. She didn't seem to address that. That bothered me. And then there was a scene where he finally does kiss her, and she got pulled. He took her off of a wagon, and there was another guy on the wagon, and they have their little kissing scene. And they never mentioned what the guy on the wagon, I always say they, the author, never mentioned what the guy on the wagon said or did. Like, he didn't mind sitting up there watching kiss happen. I don't know, sometimes I felt like there were certain things that were forgotten in both books. Like, wait a minute, you forgot about that one thing. Don't forget to go back to that one thing. And lastly, there was no humor. Can you see that? Something missing. No humor. I did notice that. The one thing in both books, there was very little humor. So, that's fine. But I do like humor in books, and they were both on the serious side. All in all, I hope that you can see past my pickiness and little criticisms, because all in all, she really does have a lot of what I enjoy in a writer. I think her stories are good, though maybe Belonging wasn't my favorite. I feel like she is a good writer. I feel like her chapters are quick and to the point. There's not a lot of regurgitation. I do like her dialogue most of the time. And actually, I like her dialogue all the time. It just happened to be in Belonging that the personalities of the character, I would have liked more dialogue and maybe different personalities, but that's opinion. It doesn't make it bad writing, or storytelling for that matter. You know, life is not always so conflicted. Sometimes you do have just a nice, sweet story, and so although that's not my favorite, I think someone may actually still really enjoy this, and I think that they would really enjoy the sequels. I may get them myself. And again, this book was really good, so I think that out of 96 books, you are going to find something you love with this author, so I'm glad I read her. So next up, I am going to read a book by Charles Martin, Send Down the Rain. I have not read a male author in a really long time, and I'm looking forward to it. So, till next time!